All right, all right.
All right, and we go ahead, Lee.
All right, great morning, everybody. Excuse me. Just hopping on here, just had my baby last night, yesterday, but I definitely did not want to miss the start of our brotherly Munch conversation and training series. So, without further ado, let's get it started. For starters, my name is Levon Kennedy. I go by he, him, his pronouns. I am the project coordinator for WAR's Healthy Masculinity Initiative. In a nutshell, the Healthy Masculinity Initiative is doing exactly what I'm trying to do right now with this Zoom space. I'm attempting to create connections with different individuals who are invested in work, involving masculinity and, deconstructing those traditional male gender roles and helping individuals, again, become more enlightened to how these roles impact them and others. When I open up these spaces, I want to openly address these things so that, again, we can see how most of these things, again, intersect with some kind of gender-based or sexual violence. So, again, really pleased to just, present on this topic because it's definitely something that has, importance to me, and it should be important to, anybody out there. It doesn't matter, your sexual orientation, your gender, what have you, this type of violence, in regards to, again, masculinity and how we are conditioned, those things, those roles can really impact us within the group, for those men who may not subscribe to those roles. And it also impacts others who, again, they just they don't fit into those roles. They don't identify as a man or such. So again, war services. Let me just briefly talk about that really quick. Again, for most people that don't know, WAR is Philadelphia's only rape crisis center. Okay, we have a lot of other agencies for mental health, intimate partner violence, what have you, but there's only one rape crisis center in the city, and that's WAR. All of our services are free of charge. So anything that you come into WAR for, whether it is individual counseling, group counseling, medical accompaniment, court accompaniment, education and outreach, any of those things, all of the services are free of charge. We're a nonprofit. We're here to service the city of Philadelphia. Again, today, we have the topic of empathy and consent. For me, this is an important topic. I wanted to start with this topic simply because of the way that I have grown up and been conditioned from a young boy up into the man that I am today. I grew up in North Philadelphia. I grew up in the Strawberry Mansion section of North Philadelphia, 30th and Diamond. So, for the most part, many people know about that section of the city. It's a lot of, high crime, high violence rate, high poverty rate. It's a lot of, it's a lot of things that people have challenges with, and like a lot of things they're struggling with. Not only, resource, deprived, but also, again, maybe emotionally or intellectually deprived as well. So we don't have too much exposure in those areas to different ideas, different sentiments, different thoughts, what have you. So I always tell two stories when I think about this topic of empathy and consent. First story I always tell is just, again, living in North Philadelphia. When I walk through the streets of North Philadelphia as a young man, and it's unfortunate that we have to think about it in this way, but as a young man, I walked through the streets of North Philadelphia. I worried about getting robbed. I worried about getting shot. I worried about getting stabbed. I worried about a number of different things that were violence driven. What I did not worry about, and what more than like I can put my bottom dollar on, did not cross my mind, was the fact that I could be sexually assaulted. Even though we all know men are susceptible to this as well. There's not a side that sexual violence picks. Anybody can be subject to this unspeakable act. So right then and there, when you're thinking about empathy, you got to think about the fact that, hey, empathy at its core is, again, how another person feels about. So, just stepping in that person's shoes, trying to, again, realize and gain a sense of how that person is, again, feeling, just keeping it simple. And even with empathy, it's so unique in a way because, for example, my father passed away. My mother passed away, and I'm sure somebody else out there can relate to that. But at the same time, we had different feelings about that. Somebody may not have a relationship with their father. Somebody might not have a relationship with their mother. So that person passing away may not have taken a toll or an effect on that person as it may have done with me. So again, even in the sense of thinking about empathy, we can't just say we know how a person feels just because we've been through it. That it doesn't necessarily always, pan out that way, shall I say. So again, living in North Philadelphia, having to move through that environment and just worrying about all the different things, I always look at that as that was an extra layer that a lot of different individuals, particularly our young ladies, had to worry about. I started to develop a sense of empathy when I was younger. You hear things, a lot of things targeted towards young ladies, as far as, don't wear a short skirt, don't be out a certain time of night, don't, wear tight fitting clothes or any of those things, because it may send some kind of message out there to people about who you are, which, obviously shouldn't be the case either. We shouldn't judge a book by its cover. But again, again, just thinking about me as a young man and growing up and just trying to develop this trait. I never got those conversations. I never was told, outside of, again, the violence that grips the city, and a lot of young men are what I would assume, in my case, I'll speak from the I, that I was worried about. They told me about those things. Yeah, don't go out late at night because you could be shot or stabbed or robbed. They didn't tell me don't go outside at night because you could be sexually assaulted. You could be kidnapped. So that wasn't something that, again, like I said, like I mentioned, it didn't really cross my mind. So developing that empathy bone really kind of started there in my neighborhoods, in the inner city, just noticing all of the things that's going on around me and trying my best to unlock a different perspective. My second story about empathy, it was recently, not recently, but as I was working here at War, I was coming to, the office, and, like I said before, mind my business, had my headphones on. As I'm entering into the Alany Transportation Center, I'm going underground. I see somebody on my peripheral, and this person like jumps off the trash can, and they're like walking towards me, and I don't know what's going on. Like, they're getting really close to me. So you want to make sure that you're checking your surroundings. This is, at the end of the day, it's still the city, and you just want to be careful about where where you're going, who you're going to, anything like that. As I took my headphones off, I hear this woman coming up to me saying a lot of vulgar things. Like, I mean, come here, baby. Let me smack your behind. I just want to pinch you. You look so sexy, I'm pretty much keeping it PG for right now. But I can tell you, in that moment, I literally felt like livestock just getting, wheeled through the meat house. Everybody was looking at me. Some people were like, laughing. Some people just were like staring. And at that particular moment, I had another epiphany. I'm like, wow, if this is anywhere how women feel when they get those same kind of comments and, and statements said to them, man, like, I don't know how they deal with all of this. I don't know how do you process this, really. Maybe it comes to a point where you become desensitized to it. So again, when thinking about empathy, like I said before, just speaking towards the male identified individuals, number one, we more than likely have not had to think about sexual violence, sexual assault in the same exact way that some of our girls, our ladies, and other individuals may have had to think about this. So that's number one. If that's not even something that's on your, radar, it's how can you even start to develop empathy about it? You have no, you're ignorant to it. You have to really start to notice and, perceive these things for what they are, even if you're that person that possibly fit in that shoe at a point in time. Case in point, if you see a lot of times individuals are like, hanging out on the corners and stuff, and it's, we individuals have catcall. Me personally, unfortunately, I have done that. I've done that when I was a young man. And then it got to a point where me and my friends, we started to develop this, you know, I would assume maturity, but we just started to develop this thing where we're like, hey, yo, you can't be just shouting out at people across the street. That's corny. You know, if you want to talk to the person, just go over there and talk to them, you know, say something to the person. And then I started to analyze that a little bit more as I grew up. And when you really think about it, that at its core is just to impress your friends. It's to impress the people around you when you catcall and say things and, you know, do those kind of acts, because it obviously is not going to capture the person's attention that you really want. So the reason behind it has to be, again, you're trying to impress the crowd that you're with. And again, that's perfectly fine, because as men, boys growing into men, male identified individuals, the key thing is to fit in. You want to fit in. Why? Because again, that could cause you to be the target of violence, the target of oppression within the group. If you are a young man who doesn't assimilate to traditional male gender norms or roles, you dress different, you act different, yes, that could potentially be a point in time or a place where you're a target for harassment, for bullying, for other forms of violence. It has happened to a lot of individuals out there. So again, that's just number one. You know, we don't have to think about it in the same regard that, you know, other individuals have to think about it. And also, just because I felt that one moment of uncomfortability does not mean I know exactly how these individuals who have to endure this consistently and constantly and over and over and over again feel. You know, when you see a person at a point in time in the day, and you may tell that person, hey, smile, you know, pick your attitude up, you know, everything's going to be okay. And it may not be. It may not be for that person, man, woman, boy, or girl. It may not be okay for that person at that time. They may have just had to endure catcalling and, you know, somebody violating their boundaries all the way up until the point where they saw you. And then, you know, to a degree, sometimes people take that as a personal attack when that person doesn't respond in the way that they wanted them to respond. But again, that's where the empathy bone comes in at. That's where being trauma aware and trauma informed comes in at. Just understand, and I always urge anybody, especially our men, become trauma aware, become trauma informed, do the research, take the trainings. You know, this can help you process some of the things that you may even have going on within yourself. So again, empathy is just feeling what another person feels, and it helps us stay connected to individuals. Okay. Um, I want to give you three types of empathy before we move on. I did a little research and they said there's three types of empathy. We have cognitive, emotional, and compassionate. So again, just going right off my notes, cognitive is just simply knowing how the other person feels and what they might be thinking, sometimes called perspective taking. So I mentioned that a lot, just having a different perspective, having perception, and, you know, looking a little bit more in depth into what's going on instead of just, you know, keeping it surface level. So, for example, if you imagine yourself in your friend's shoes, you would know that they are likely to be feeling sad as well as anxious because they rely on something. For example, they may rely on student loans to pay their you know, their bills for class. They may rely on their paycheck, solely on their paycheck. They may not have any other means or sources of income to make sure that they keep their bills and things afloat. So again, to truly connect with that person, you got to share their feelings. So again, that's where emotional empathy comes into play. So now, if you're going to get to emotional empathy, this is when you feel physically along with the other person, as through though their emotions were contagious. So in our field, we call that when it happens in a particular way, we call that vicarious traumatization, when something just kind of like fits the bill a little bit too closely for you, and you start to, and, you know, take on and some of those feelings of the other individual, or you start to feel those emotions. This type of empathy can also extend to physical sensations, which is why we cringe when someone else stubs their toe. I've done it before. I see somebody stub their toe, hurt themselves, like, oh, wow, I know what you're feeling, right? Um, in this case, you will look inwards to identify a situation where you are similarly anxious about the future. So the situation itself doesn't need to be identical, as each individual is different. What is important, though, is that the emotions resulting from the situation are the same. And then we have also compassionate empathy. And with this kind of empathy, we not only understand a person's predicament and feel with them, but we are spontaneously moved to help if needed. And that's where I really want a lot of us to move towards, that not just having that baseline level of empathy, not having that emotional or cognitive level, and not just having that. Move to compassion, move to helping people, move to action. Of course, doing it in a safe manner, but just moving to that. Now, this is the balance between cognitive and emotional empathy that enables us to act as, again, without being overcome with fear or feelings, or jumping straight into a problem solving process. So again, we don't want to get there, see somebody going through something, and we're like, okay, so how do I want to attack this problem, and what else does this person need? Sometimes the best thing to do is just to act, throw yourself into the game. And again, this is key, because this is where I want most of my conversations to revolve around. Anything that we talk about, it has some level of empathy to it. I want you to try your best in any brotherly Munch conversation to, again, look at the other side of the pillow. Put yourself in that person's shoes, whatever term that you want to use, to combat that traditional conditioning that we've pretty much been taught as we've grown up. Next another story about that, because I love telling stories, as you can see, but they relate. If you really look back into your life, you can really see some things. It's just like, wow, like, that's a moment where I could have possibly been hugged when I was crying, and somebody told me, stop crying, boys don't cry. And I started to hide my emotions, right? I was 4 years old, just learned how to ride my bike. I'm riding in the street, I'm flying, wind is in my hair, and I'm going. I unfortunately lose my balance, and I crash my knee into one of those like steel 1982 cars. Everybody knows those box cars look like. And man, did my knee hurt. To this day, I kind of still feel like I feel some of that pain. But the thing was, I'm in pain. I got off my bike, I'm crawling towards my house, because I was a couple doors down from my house. So I'm calling, but what I'm doing, I'm calling out loud, like, grandma, just calling for somebody to help me. Cause like I said, my knees hurt. She runs to the door. What was going on? I'm like, grandma, I just crashed into the car. Like, my knee hurt, my knee. And she's like, are you bleeding? I look down, I'm like, no, I'm not bleeding. Get up and finish playing. Like, everything's okay. Like, nothing wrong with you. I literally could have broken my kneecap, my leg. And I know my grandma meant well. I'm sure she did. She was raised a certain way. So, we all have been socialized and take on these ideals and these things in whatever way that we can. We pray and we, submit them to the world. But again, like I said, she was like, get up. You're not bleeding. Everything's okay. Go on, finish playing. I could have still had something wrong with me, even though my knee wasn't bleeding. So again, I can only imagine how a young lady would have gotten a different response had that same exact thing happened to them. So just making sure I just threw that out there as far as that story, because again, that's where a lot of us as men, we lose our vulnerability. We start to lose that at a really, really tender and young age, to be quite frank. It is actually as young as 4 years old. Jim Hopper, who does a lot of research on masculinity, gender roles, things like that. He actually talked about that. That's the age in the life where a young boy is actually pushed to be more physical in nature, but less emotional in nature as well. And then it moves through your phases. As far as when you start to get older, you become less emotionally available. You become, more emotionally illiterate, because you haven't had any time to really use those feelings and process those feelings, because again, that is contradictive of what it means to be a man, right? So again, empathy is that backbone that will help us, again, connect to individuals a little bit more. It will help us possibly prevent ourselves from engaging in any of those acts that may make a person feel uncomfortable. It'll help us think twice about some of our mannerisms, some of our decision making, some of the things we say to people, how we act towards people. So I really, really want people to start engaging in that. So that's the biggest, one of the biggest takeaways from this conversation. And if we're thinking about empathy, we got to talk about, consent, because again, growing up as a young man, I was speaking as far as what my dad gave me to talk about the birds and the bees. He mentioned nothing about consent. My dad was a veteran. He was a very, very smart man, and very, 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 very well respected in his neighborhood by any individual that he came across. My dad even met President Bill Clinton at a point in time. So he was a man of, a lot of different things. He did a lot of different things in his life. But again, I always kind of resort back to, when I talk about consent, I always think back like, yo, my dad gave me a great conversation about that. But I did not hear anything about consent. I knew what no meant, but I didn't understand the concept of consent and how that plays into these situations. And I want to make sure I make something clear. A lot of times people say, well, this person, both people were drunk, both people were, one person was acting a little flirty and promiscuous or anything like that. But you need to understand that the onus is always on the individual who wants to court the other individual. It's never that if you want this act to happen, you need to make sure that you're taking the proper, not just steps, but the proper steps in order for this act to be, again, legal, just for lack of a better word, because that's really what I'm about to get into. Because even with consent, we don't understand the legal terminology around it. Now, consent cannot be given if a person is DUUI. That's my acronym for it. If a person is drunk, unconscious, underage, under the influence of any drug, or if it's incest, or if they are incapable of making that kind of decision. For example, if somebody's IQ level was lower or just not average, or, again, they suffer from some kind of cognitive, impairment, and you ask that person to engage in a sexual act, they may not understand what they're really about to engage in. So again, they really can't fully give you consent. So even speaking from the terms of, again, starting with drunk, no, you cannot technically have consent from somebody if they're get granted consent from someone if they're drunk. They're under the influence of any drug, if they're unconscious, if they're underage. None of those things, again, equal consent. But a lot of times, again, like I said, the onus or the credibility is stripped from these individuals who've had this act happen to them, and a lot of the onus for the prevention is put on those individuals who has happened to, instead of the onus really being put on young men to actually learn what consent is, to engage in self-control, to engage in, not understanding what boundaries are, and, sticking true to that, and understanding what a boundary violation means and what it looks like. um Understanding how this may impact their future, literally understanding, hey, you can become a sexual offender, you can be put on the sex offenders list, you can potentially be denied jobs, you can potentially be denied access to a higher education institution. So there are a lot of different ramifications that can happen as a result of someone not getting consent from another individual, and this person taking this person up on charges. We've seen this in cases everywhere, but again, the unfortunate part is, like I said, a lot of times the victims don't get the justice that they deserve. Case in point with Brock Turner. Brock Turner was consistently referred to as the Stanford swimmer. So they still try to paint him in this, bright light, even though he had sexually assaulted somebody behind a dumpster in the alleyway. So there are other instances of things like that have happened as well. So again, these victims don't always get, and survivors don't always get the justice that they deserve and what they need. So again, my biggest point that I always make is just making sure that we, as the chasers, I'll say, we, as the pursuers, if we are going to pursue someone else, if you're going to, try to talk to that person, gain this person's hand, have this person grant you permission to engage in these acts, you need to make sure that you're taking the proper steps. You need to make sure you understand what consent is. You have a full understanding of what consent is. And most importantly, you need to have self-control. You must have self-control, because that's where the biggest challenge comes in at. the conditioning of those male gender roles, it impacts the way that we look at a lot of these things in terms of sexual assault and sexual violence. Because we have the privilege of not having to think about sexual violence in that way, because we have the privilege of moving through life as men and not having to worry about um us having those same stories that are told to some of our young lady counterparts, as far as don't go out late at night because you may get kidnapped, don't dress a certain way, don't act a certain way, don't talk a certain way, because of the impact that, or the attention that it may draw from, again, other individuals like men or boys or other male identified individuals. So the masculine development, when you think about us being conditioned in that kind of way, it really puts us in this position where, again, other individuals face this violence outside of the group, but also people inside the group face scrutiny. Again, I heard a while ago at a conference, I heard a keynote speaker talk about this ladder of masculinity, and it really resonated with me, because a ladder, the goal of having a ladder, you want to get to the top. Everybody knows that. And you use the rungs of the ladder to get to the top. You don't just pull yourself up. You actually step and climb. It's actual thought put into each step that you're doing, just to make sure that you don't fall, hurt yourself, anything like that. But how he mentioned this ladder of masculinity, they talked about it as far as you want to get as high as you can on this ladder, simply because it enhances, or it defines more of the type of man you are. So the higher you are, the more you fit inside of this traditional mold of masculinity. You fit more into the strong, unfeeling, powerful, take charge. I'm the breadwinner. I am, I'm really lethargic. I'm not really emotional in nature. I'm always trying my best to think logically. So when you try your best to fit into this role, and a lot of this also is a lot of this stuff, it also revolves around aggression too. So I want to make sure I put that out there. Aggression, filtering all of your emotions to anger. Anger is seen as good, or safe. Fear, vulnerability, bad, unsafe. You don't want to show that you're soft. You don't want to show any of those emotions that, again, may have a person look at you in a particular kind of manner, or you lose social currency within your group. So climbing that ladder of masculinity can be rough and challenging for a lot of individuals. They may not fit those roles. They may not fit the traditional male gender role. So what's left for those individuals? How are they treated when they come across these other individuals who fit inside of those gender roles? It really, I would assume it sucks for those people, to be quite frank. But again, back to empathy. That's us understanding that, hey, understand what this person's feeling. It's not a one size fit all out here. We're all different. We're all unique for that particular reason. Some of my final thoughts on this, consent. Again, it needs to be taught. As early as possible. Consent doesn't just revolve around sex. Consent revolves around people's property. Consent revolves around going into someone's home. Consent revolves around any and everything that belongs to another person. You need to get permission. That's all it is. It's permission, approval, or agreement. I need a lot of us out here who are trying to engage in these acts to understand that silence does not grant consent. Silence does not equal yes. And also, consent can be revoked at any given point in time, whether it's pre or during the act. Anything you do after, for example, if you're in the middle of a sexual act and the person says stop, you're just like, no, I just want to, that's sexual assault. Think about it. If your mother tells you you're doing something, your mother tells you, all right, I want you to stop. You don't say, hey, I want to keep going, because that could stir up trouble for your mom. Your mom at that time, in this particular manner, has the power in this situation. So that's where that other dynamic comes into play too, where, hey, you don't have the power in this situation with your mom. But again, with you potentially understanding, again, some of those unspoken things that might come into play. A man normally may be bigger than a woman, taller than a woman, maybe stronger than a woman at times, may even be the boss of a particular organization or institution or branch, and they use that to their advantage. They use it to their advantage. So with that being said, I just want everybody, again, to just really start to come to an understanding of, again, what empathy is, what consent is, and how those two things impact or intersect, rather, with those traditional male gender roles, and how they impact, again, in group and out group. It's a really challenging situation to have yourself in when if you're an advocate, and again, for myself, that's why I do this. This is why I want to do this. I will continue to do this because, again, I'm a cisgendered heterosexual male, and I like to be the messenger. I like to be that person that breaks this stuff down from a different perspective and from a different analytical and from a different way. Last story before I close out. When Bill Cosby was first sentenced, I was inside of a gas station looking at a paper. Another guy in front of me was looking at a paper, and this is about this kind of revolves around consent too, and a little bit about empathy. But I was looking at the paper, Bill Cosby's front page on the paper. The guy looks back at me because he sees me staring at it. And I'm like, I just like, like, it is what it is, kind of thing. And he's like, what do you think about that? I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm like, just trying to my best to hide who I am. I don't want to, press that too hard on him, but I kind of want to walk you down, like, my train of thought about a lot of this stuff. I said, I don't know, man. Like, if I gave you 50 jump shots, would you be able to make at least one? He said, yeah. I'm like, all right, so that's all that really matters. Even if you want to say 49 women were lying, one wasn't. And that makes you a rapist. That makes you a sexual predator. It's just that simple. It's almost at the point where I believe that every man in some way, shape, or form has either made a person feel uncomfortable or every single woman that I may know in some way, shape, or form has felt uncomfortable due to something that a male or man may have done, said, any of those things. So back to the story. I'm talking about this to the guy in front of me, and the guys behind me, they just go off. They're like, oh my gosh, like, you believe that stuff? And why would these women really be going to this man's house late at night? They knew what it was, and just a bunch of mess. And I'm like, okay, this is the kind of conversation I want to have, to be quite honest. And so I turn around, I say, okay, you acting like they can't change their mind. Just that simple. Okay, they did go to their house. Okay, they did enter inside his home. Okay, they did have a drink. But you acting like people can't change their mind, like that's why again, that self-control comes into play. If Bill Cosby didn't have the notoriety and the power and the privilege that he had, those things matter in those particular arenas. So like I said, it was just a tale of two cities right in front of me. I had one guy that was kind of like questioning it, just trying to gain some more insight on it. Other guys just flat out, this is what it is. They knew what they were doing. And again, still going back to that, keeping that onus on yourself. If you're going to pursue this act, you want to make sure that you do it correctly. That's what I'm saying. With that being said, this concludes our Brotherly Munch conversation and training series for the month. Feel free to visit our website, www.war.org, to look up all of our services, ways that, if you want to support us, you can do it through there. If you want Healthy Masculinity to come out to an organization of yours and, facilitate one of these kind of discussions, feel free to reach out through our hotline, which is 215-985-3333. Or you could use my email, which is LEVONE@war.org. With that being said, everybody, thank you, like I said before, for having me present this to you for our Brotherly Munch Conversation and Training Series. And as I said before, I want to have these Brotherly Munch Conversation and Training Series because we're living in the city of brotherly love. So, we want to make sure that we spread love, we're spreading awareness, we're spreading joy. It's a lot of craziness happening out there today, but we want to make sure that we're living in some kind of purpose, and we're spreading that love on purpose. So